There are things a man builds with his hands that mean more than money ever could. Things built out of sweat, patience, and memory. For me, that thing was the bridge. It wasn't much to look at from a distance, just a simple wooden crossing stretched over the narrow creek that cut through my land. But to me, it was the line that separated what I'd earned from what others tried to take. I built that bridge after my father passed. He'd left me the old ranch, a quiet stretch of green tucked between the woods and the foothills, the kind of place people drive past and think belongs to another time. But the truth is, the old place was struggling. Years of storms had weakened the soil, and the only way in or out was across that creek. So I welded the frame, cut the planks, and poured the concrete myself. I remember my neighbor, Miguel, standing nearby, shaking his head and saying, "That thing will outlive us both, Mike." I smiled and said, "Good. Maybe then people will remember it was built right. He was wrong about one thing. Though, it wouldn't outlive the greed that was about to find its way down my road. For years, the bridge stood untouched, steady, silent, loyal. Every morning I'd cross it in my old pickup, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the ridge. Then, one morning, I noticed the first sign that something was wrong. Tire tracks. Not my trucks, not Miguel's old Ford. These were wider, deeper, industrial. At first, I brushed it off, thinking maybe a delivery driver had taken a wrong turn. But when I followed the tracks, they led across the bridge, down my drive, and right into the far field, the one that backed up to the Ridgepoint Estates development. Ridgepoint. Just hearing that name made my jaw tighten. That's where she lived, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, Karen Hastings. She was the type who thought everything within a 5-mile radius was her personal domain. I'd met her once at a county meeting when she'd complained about unsightly rural roads, ruining the view for her gated community. She'd worn sunglasses indoors, carried a clipboard, and spoke like she was auditioning for a reality show. Now, somehow her world and mine had collided. Later that afternoon, I drove to the back of my property, and sure enough, there it was. A construction crew on my land. 3 cement trucks, an excavator, and a handful of workers in hard hats were parked right past the tree line, tearing into the soil like they owned the place. "Hey!" I shouted over the rumble of machinery. "Who told you could be out here?" A man in an orange vest turned, startled. "We were told this was part of the Ridgepoint expansion zone." "By who?" Ms. Hastings," he said, glancing at a clipboard. "She said she had permission to access the creek from this side." I laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't sound friendly. "That creek's on my property. You're trespassing." The workers looked at each other, uncomfortable. One of them shut off the mixer. The foreman raised his hands. "We don't want trouble, sir. We'll pull back until this gets sorted out." "Good call," I said. "And take your trucks with you. That bridge isn't rated for heavy loads." As they started to leave, one of the drivers muttered under his breath, "She said it was fine." I shook my head. She was wrong. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. "Unknown number, Mr. Carpenter?" The voice was sharp and smug. "This is Karen Hastings, president of the Ridgepoint HOA. I understand you're interfering with our infrastructure project." "Interfering?" I repeated. "You sent cement trucks over my bridge. That's called trespassing." "I have authorization from the county to access the creek for drainage improvements," she said. "Funny," I said, "because the county office told me no permits were issued for that side." There was a pause, followed by her clipped tone. "You're being unreasonable. The community's development will increase local property values, including yours." "I'm not interested in your charity," I said. "You or anyone working for Ridgepoint steps on my land again, and I'll make sure the sheriff hears about it." Her voice hardened. "You don't want to pick a fight with me, Mr. Carpenter. You'll lose." I smiled into the phone. "Lady, I build things for a living. Losing's not in my skill set." Click. The next morning, I heard the rumble again. That same deep growl of diesel engines echoing through the trees. When I looked out my window, I saw it. 3 cement trucks lined up at the bridge, waiting to cross. I ran outside, waving my arms. "Turn those trucks around!" The first driver hesitated, but the foreman leaned out his window. "Sorry, sir. We have written approval. Ms. Hastings said you'd come around." "She lied," I shouted. "That bridge can't handle that weight." But before I could stop them, the first truck started forward. Heavy tires creaking against the wooden boards. The bridge groaned under the pressure. "Stop!" I yelled. The driver froze, uncertain. But the second truck in line honked impatiently, and with a shrug, the first one rolled ahead. Crack! The sound echoed like a gunshot through the valley. The front boards bowed under the strain. I could hear the metal welds groaning, see the wood splintering under the concrete weight. The driver hit the brakes. Too late. Crash. The bridge dipped, one corner collapsing into the muddy bank. The truck lurched, tilted, and sank halfway into the creek with a sickening crunch of metal and water. The workers jumped out, yelling, trying to steady it, but it was useless. Cement slurry spilled into the creek, turning the water cloudy gray. I stood there, fists clenched, watching years of my work crumble because someone thought rules didn't apply to them. That night, I sat on the porch staring at what was left of the bridge. The reflection of the half-submerged truck shimmered in the moonlight like a ghost. Miguel stopped by, shaking his head. "That woman's gonna pay for this," he said. "Oh, she will," I replied quietly. "But not the way she expects." He looked at me curiously. "You planning to rebuild it?" I took a long sip of my coffee, eyes never leaving the wreckage. "No, I'm planning something better." And that's when the idea began, the kind of idea that comes to you in the dark when you've had enough of being pushed around. If Karen Hastings wanted to keep crossing my land, she was about to find out what happens when a rancher with a welder's hands decides to set a trap. The next morning I woke up early. The air was thick with the smell of wet soil and cement dust, and the creek murmured below, still clouded from yesterday's mess. The bridge, or what was left of it, sat slanted, half submerged under the weight of a cement truck that had no business being there. It wasn't just broken, it was humiliated, and I'll be honest, part of me wanted to rebuild it just to prove I could. But another part of me, the part that had been patient for far too long, wanted something else, something that would make sure no one ever tried this again. I stood there for a while, hands in my pockets, watching sunlight break over the wreck. I thought about my father, how he used to say that some lessons don't need to be shouted, just shown once loud enough to echo. Yeah, I could do that. Before anything else, I called the county to report the incident, partly for record, partly to see if they'd step in. "Sir," the woman on the phone said after I explained what happened, "if that's private property, the HOA had no legal right to authorize access." "That's what I figured," I said. "But I bet they'll twist it into something else," she sighed. "Unfortunately, you're right. But I'll file an incident report. You might also want to get a structural inspection for the bridge if you plan to repair it." "Repair?" I said with a grin. "No. I'm building something new." Miguel showed up that afternoon like he always did when trouble smelled fresh. He stood at the creek's edge, arms crossed, whistling low. "Well, she finally did it." "Karen turned your bridge into modern art." "Yeah," I said. "But the gallery's closed," he chuckled. "So what's the plan?" I looked over at the wrecked truck, still stuck at an angle in the mud. "First, I'm gonna let her pay for removing that hunk of junk. Then I'm building something they can't touch. Ever again." Miguel grinned. "You gonna make it out of steel?" "Oh, I'm gonna make it out of a lot of things," I said. "Steel's just the start." For the next week, I drew up plans. I wasn't an engineer, but I'd spent enough time welding, fixing farm equipment, and rebuilding structures to know what worked. This new bridge wasn't going to be just functional. It was going to be a message. I bought reinforced steel beams from a scrapyard, ordered heavy-gauge rebar, and had a local fabricator cut me panels that could hold a tank if I wanted them to. Every night I worked in my shed, the glow of the welding torch painting the walls in gold and blue. The smell of burning metal filled the air, sharp and electric. I worked until my hands ached and my back stiffened, stopping only when the moon was high. By the third night, Miguel stopped by again with a six-pack. "You look like a man plotting war," he said. I didn't even look up from my torch. Not war, balance, he laughed softly. Same thing, amigo. Meanwhile, the HOA didn't stay quiet. 3 days after the crash, I got a letter, thick, formal, printed on Ridgepoint letterhead. Dear Mr. Carpenter, your refusal to cooperate with community development has caused substantial delay and financial loss to Ridgepoint Estates. The damaged bridge is obstructing access to vital infrastructure improvements. You are hereby ordered to remove the debris immediately or face legal action for interfering with public safety. Public safety. That made me laugh out loud. I folded the letter neatly, tucked it in an envelope, and mailed it back with one sentence written in red ink. Cross this bridge again, and you'll regret it. The next day, 2 HOA board members drove down to negotiate. I met them halfway down my driveway. Hands dirty, welding goggles around my neck? Mr. Carpenter, one of them began nervously, we just want to resolve this peacefully. Ms. Hastings is very concerned about the impact this will have on property values. Property values? I said, wiping sweat off my brow. She should have thought about that before she dumped a cement truck in my creek. The second man cleared his throat. Karen believes there was a misunderstanding. She'd like to offer to cover half the repair costs if you sign a permanent access agreement. I cut him off. Not happening. But I said no, I said firmly. You can tell her she already paid her toll. The men exchanged uneasy glances, then left. I watched their SUV disappear down the dirt road, dust swirling behind them. For the first time in a while, I felt something close to peace. By week 2, my bridge started to take shape. The base was steel now, 6-inch beams driven deep into concrete footings. Over that, I laid cross-bracing thick enough to hold an army truck. Every bolt was tightened, every weld double-checked. But here's the part no one saw: the trap. I wasn't building this bridge just to hold weight. I was designing it to react to it. See, I'd hidden a set of pressure plates beneath the main decking. Old components I'd salvaged from an industrial way station years ago. When triggered by anything over a certain weight, say a 20-ton cement truck, they'd set off a hydraulic latch underneath. Not enough to cause a collapse, but just enough to tilt one side slightly, sending any overloaded vehicle sliding right back into the mud. Legal? Maybe not. Effective? Absolutely. Miguel saw the setup one afternoon and raised an eyebrow. You're serious about this? Dead serious, I said. She wants to use my bridge? She'll learn what weight limit really means. He laughed so hard he nearly dropped his drink. You're a madman. Maybe, I said, tightening the last bolt. But I'm a patient one. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. You'll regret this, Mike. The HOA won't back down. I didn't even need to ask who it was. I just typed back, neither will I. That weekend, a white SUV slowed near my gate. I saw her, Karen Hastings, sitting behind the wheel, sunglasses on, glaring like she could burn holes through steel. She didn't say a word, just stared, revved her engine once, and drove off toward Ridgepoint. Miguel, who happened to be helping me paint the railing, said quietly, "She's not done." "No," I said, "but neither is the bridge." By Monday morning, it was finished. The new structure gleamed in the early sun, solid, sleek, and stronger than ever. The steel rails caught the light, and the creek ran clear beneath it again. I leaned against the post, hands on my hips, admiring the work. It was beautiful, but not in the way you'd admire a sculpture. It was beautiful because it meant something. This wasn't just a bridge anymore. It was a line, one no HOA would ever cross again without paying the price. The new bridge looked like something out of a postcard, all sleek steel and polished decking, glowing in the morning sun. But beneath that shine was something only I knew about, the mechanism that would expose every ounce of arrogance that tried to cross it. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about teaching people like Karen Hastings that some lines aren't theirs to redraw. For 3 peaceful days, no one came near my property. The creek ran clear, the cows grazed quietly, and the valley felt calm again. But I knew better than to believe that peace would last. On the fourth morning, I was welding new hinges on the gate when I saw the dust plume rising on the far road. 3 vehicles. One white SUV, one black pickup, and, trailing behind them, a flatbed carrying concrete mixers. I took off my gloves slowly and waited. The first car stopped just short of the gate. Out stepped Karen, looking every bit like the queen of bad decisions. Navy blazer, clipboard, oversized sunglasses, and that same smug smile that could curdle milk. Behind her came 2 men in county vests and a woman holding a camera. She looked at me like she was addressing a peasant. "Mr. Carpenter," she said sharply, "we're here under county authority to remove hazardous debris from your creek and restore public access to the Ridge Road." I couldn't help but laugh. "You mean my bridge? The one your trucks destroyed?" She didn't flinch. "The bridge sits in a shared watershed. That makes it part of a community access zone." "That's creative," I said. "You come up with that in a board meeting or in front of a mirror?" One of the men stepped forward, clipboard shaking slightly. "Sir, we just need to inspect the bridge for safety before allowing heavy equipment through. Standard procedure." "Inspect away," I said, stepping aside with a grin. Karen smirked, thinking she'd just won. "See, Mr. Carpenter? Cooperation isn't so hard." The inspectors walked up to the bridge, jotting notes, snapping photos. I watched them carefully. They weighed maybe 160 each. Not enough to trigger the trap. They tested the planks, tapped the rails, and nodded. "It's solid," one said. "Looks brand new." Karen turned to me with that predatory smile. "Good. Then my team can continue their work." She waved her hand, and like a general giving orders, the flatbed began to move. The first cement truck revved its engine, grinding gears as it crawled toward the bridge. I stepped closer, voice calm but clear. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Karen folded her arms. "It's my right. The HOA has every authorization." "Then go right ahead," I said softly. The truck's front wheels rolled onto the steel decking. For a second, everything was fine. The hum of the engine, the sound of tires against metal, the onlooker's confidence. Then the bridge groaned. The driver hesitated. "Ma'am, it's shifting." Karen waved him forward impatiently. "It's fine." "Keep going!" He looked unsure, but obeyed. The truck crept forward another 10 feet. The metal undercarriage let out a slow, low clang. And then, the sound I'd been waiting for. The quiet click of the hydraulic release engaging. The left side of the bridge dipped by 2 inches, barely noticeable to anyone watching from afar. But inside the truck, gravity shifted. Slowly, then suddenly, whoa, whoa. The driver yelled as the back wheels slid sideways. Karen's sunglasses slipped down her nose as the truck began to tilt, not enough to crash, but enough to scare the life out of everyone standing nearby. Cement sloshed in the mixer, spilling out the top like gray soup. "Back it up," the foreman shouted, but the truck's tires spun helplessly, slick with wet cement. The bridge tilted another inch, forcing the driver to slam the brakes. I stood there, arms crossed, as the truck sat frozen mid-span, teetering, trapped, and completely at my mercy. Karen's voice went shrill. "Do something. You can't let it fall." "Fall?" I said calmly. "I told you the bridge wasn't rated for heavy loads. Seems you didn't listen." Again, the inspectors backed away nervously, radioing their supervisors. The foreman cursed under his breath, glaring at Karen. "You said it was safe." She looked around, panicked. "It was. He must have sabotaged it." "Lady," I said, smiling, "I built it." For nearly 20 minutes, the crew tried to stabilize the truck. They brought chains, planks, anything they could think of, but every time they tried to move forward, the hydraulics groaned again, threatening to shift further. Finally, the county inspector threw up his hands. "We're shutting this down." "This isn't safe." Karen's jaw dropped. "You can't do that. We have permits." "Permits don't override physics," he snapped. She turned to me, livid. "You'll pay for this." I leaned against the fence post, relaxed. "Seems like you're the one paying for cleanup again." The foreman muttered something to his crew, and they slowly started backing equipment away. The truck stayed stranded until a tow rig arrived hours later. By the time they got it free, the whole creek bank was a mess, and the HOA's patience was gone. That night, Miguel came over carrying a pizza and a grin. "Heard about the circus you had today," he said. "Half the town's talking about it," I chuckled. "Let them. Maybe it'll save the next guy some trouble," he laughed. "What did Karen do when the truck started sliding?" "Turned white as concrete," I said. "Screamed something about lawsuits, then ran off before the sheriff showed up." Miguel whistled low. "You sure she won't try again?" I took a long sip of my beer. "Oh, she'll try something. But she won't come across that bridge again. Not in a truck, anyway." He nodded, serious now. "You know she's gonna spin this, right? Make you look like the villain?" I smiled. Then it's time the villain told his side. The next day, I posted photos of the wreck on my social page. No captions. Just the image of the truck half stuck, half tilted over the bridge. Sunlight gleaming off the steel rails. Within hours, the comments poured in. "That HOA finally got what it deserved. Serves them right for trespassing. That bridge looks stronger than her entire neighborhood." It went viral in town. Even local papers picked it up. "Cement truck accident exposes HOA overreach." Karen tried to issue a press release calling it a structural failure caused by unauthorized reconstruction. But when the county engineer's report came out 2 days later, it cleared me completely. The bridge had met or exceeded all safety standards. The accident was caused by overweight vehicles ignoring posted restrictions. Her words lost all power. For the first time in months, I slept easy. The creek bubbled softly outside, and the bridge, my bridge, stood proud, solid, and undefeated. But I knew it wasn't over. People like Karen don't quit when they lose. They regroup, scheme, and come back louder. She'd tasted humiliation. Now she wanted revenge, and I was ready for her. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen Hastings, it's this: they can't stand losing. They'd rather burn their own world to ashes than admit they were wrong. For a few days, the valley was quiet. Too quiet. No trucks, no calls, no HOA visitors creeping around my fence line. But quiet from a Karen doesn't mean peace. It means she's plotting, and sure enough, the storm hit by the end of the week. It started with letters. Thick envelopes stamped with Ridge Point Legal Department. Then came phone calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Voicemails from lawyers using words like civil liability and reckless endangerment. By the third notice, I knew exactly what was happening. Karen was trying to sue me for damages to community property and public obstruction. The same woman who trespassed, destroyed my bridge, and nearly drowned a cement truck was now calling herself the victim. I wasn't surprised. Just disappointed. I called Evelyn, my lawyer. She answered like she'd been expecting me. "Let me guess," she said. "You've been served. 3 times in 2 days," I said. "You'd think she was handing out party invitations," she sighed. "She's bluffing, but she's good at it." "This is intimidation, plain and simple. She wants me to break," I said. "Exactly," Evelyn replied. "She's banking on you getting tired, scared, or sloppy." "Don't give her that satisfaction," I smiled faintly. "Wouldn't dream of it." A few days later, I drove into town for supplies. The moment I walked into the hardware store, I could feel it on the stairs. Whispers. "Isn't that the guy with the bridge? I heard he almost killed a cement driver." No, the HOA framed him." Rumors spread faster than fire in dry grass. At the checkout counter, old Mr. Denton leaned close and said quietly, "You might want to check this out." He slid me a folded copy of the Ridgeview Gazette. The headline read, "Local landowner endangers public safety. HOA demands investigation." And right beneath it, a photo of me, arms crossed, standing by the bridge, taken without my permission. I exhaled slowly. "She's playing dirty." "She's got friends at the paper," Denton said. "But half the town ain't buying it." "Good," I said. "The other half will learn soon enough." When I got home, I noticed a drone buzzing above the pasture. Small, black, circling like a vulture. I didn't need binoculars to guess who sent it. Karen wasn't just attacking with words now. She was gathering evidence. That night, I installed motion lights along the bridge, trail cameras in the trees, and one of my old security rigs from when I ran a welding shop in town. I wasn't about to let her twist another inch of truth. The next day, She made her move. I was eating breakfast when I heard engines outside again. When I stepped onto the porch, I saw 2 sheriff cruisers and, of course, that familiar white SUV parked behind them. Karen stood beside the deputies. Arms folded, expression smug as a cat in cream. One of the deputies, a younger guy named Porter, walked up. "Morning, Mike. We got a complaint about safety hazards on your bridge." The HOA filed for inspection. I kept my tone even. "They can look all they want, but no heavy vehicles. You know the rules." Porter nodded. "We'll be careful," Karen smiled sweetly. "We're just ensuring the public isn't at risk." "Public?" I said, arching a brow. "You mean my property?" She ignored me and motioned toward the bridge. "Go ahead, officers." The deputies walked across carefully, inspecting the planks and railings. One of them crouched, running his hand over the steel joints. "Looks solid to me," he said. "Brand new," the other added. Karen frowned. "It can't be. This man rebuilt it illegally." Porter checked his notes. "Permits are valid, ma'am. County already approved his structure." Her smile faltered. "That can't be right." I leaned against the porch post, arms crossed. "You're welcome to call the county again. They love hearing from you." Karen's cheeks flushed pink. "This isn't over, Carpenter." "You can't hide behind paperwork forever." I grinned. "Funny, I thought paperwork was your favorite weapon." The deputies tried not to laugh as she stormed back to her SUV, slamming the door hard enough to shake the mirrors. Later that evening, Miguel came by, shaking his head with disbelief. "You know she's losing it when the sheriff's laughing at her." I poured him a beer. "She's losing control." "That's worse." He nodded slowly. "So what now?" I stared at the creek beyond the window. "Now, I wait. She's going to try one more move. She always does. And when she does, I'll be ready." Sure enough, 2 days later, the last piece of her plan showed up. A cease and desist order from the HOA board. The document was ridiculous. It accused me of obstructing community development, creating an unsafe environment, and installing a private structure without consultation. It demanded I dismantle my bridge within 14 days or face civil seizure of assets. That was it. I'd been patient long enough. I called Evelyn. "You busy tomorrow?" "Not if it's what I think it is," she said. "Oh, it's exactly that," I replied. "We're going to pay Ridgepoint a visit." The next morning, we drove to the HOA headquarters, a fancy little building that looked more like a wine bar than an office. Inside, a handful of board members sat around a table looking nervous as Karen stood at the head like a self-appointed judge. Evelyn walked in first, calm and confident. "Good morning. I represent Mr. Carpenter." Karen smirked. "You're here to settle?" "Settle?" Evelyn said. "No, we're here to deliver notice." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Notice of what?" "Defamation, trespassing, property damage, and fraudulent claims," Evelyn said smoothly, placing a thick envelope on the table. "And a formal demand for reimbursement for the destruction of Mr. Carpenter's original bridge." The room went silent. Karen's composure cracked. "You can't—" "Oh, we can," Evelyn interrupted. "And we are." The board members shifted uncomfortably. One of them, a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, spoke up. "Karen, is this true?" "About the unauthorized access?" she stammered. He's exaggerating." Evelyn smiled coldly. "Then I'm sure the county's drone footage will clear it up. You see, it shows her directing those cement trucks across private property. Twice." The boardroom went still. Karen's face drained of color. I leaned forward. "This isn't a game anymore. Stay off my land. Tear up the order and fix what you broke." When I walked out of that room, I felt lighter than I had in months. Miguel called that evening after hearing the news. "So, how'd the Queen of Ridgepoint handle her dethroning?" I chuckled. "Like a cat in a bathtub." He laughed so hard I had to set the phone down. But deep inside, I knew it wasn't just a win for me. It was a win for every person who had ever been bullied by a title, a form, or a fake smile backed by paperwork. And the best part? The game wasn't even over yet, because Karen had one more move left, and I'd already welded her fate into steel. By the time Evelyn filed the lawsuit, word had spread faster than wildfire. Every cafe, gas station, and Facebook group in town was buzzing about it. Did you hear? The HOA queen finally met her match. About time someone stood up to Ridgepoint. They say the bridge guy's suing for 6 figures. I didn't care about the gossip. I cared about one thing: principle. Because when people like Karen get away with enough lies, they start thinking they own the truth. Not anymore. The county hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Until then, I went about my work like normal, feeding the cattle, fixing fences, repairing the shed roof. But even through the rhythm of daily chores, I could feel it. The tension building, the quiet before the next move. On Wednesday, I found my mailbox stuffed full of envelopes again. Most were junk, but one stood out, a handwritten note. "You've made a big mistake, Mike. The HOA isn't done with you yet. No name. No return address." But I didn't need either. Karen was running out of power, and when people like her lose control, they lash out. That night, I made sure every light on my property worked. The bridge cameras were rolling, the alarms were live, and my phone was charged. If she wanted a fight, she was going to get it, on record. Sure enough, just past midnight, I heard the sound of engines again. Not one this time. 3. Headlights crept down the ridge road, cutting through the darkness. I slipped on my jacket and stepped onto the porch, watching quietly. 3 pickup trucks stopped near the creek. A group of men got out. I recognized 2 of them immediately. Ridgepoint contractors. And there she was, standing behind them, wrapped in a coat, holding that same clipboard like it was a weapon. Karen Hastings. Even under moonlight, I could see the fury in her eyes. "Mike!" she shouted, her voice echoing through the valley. "We're clearing this bridge tonight!" I called back calmly. "Without a permit? That'll look great in court. This is community property," she snapped. "You've caused enough trouble." One of the men hesitated. "Ma'am, this doesn't feel right. Do it!" she barked. The men started walking toward the big bridge with flashlights and tools. That's when I hit the switch. A loud, mechanical clunk echoed from beneath the bridge. The sound of steel locks disengaging. The men froze. The deck tilted slightly, and the lights they'd set down rolled toward the water. "Back up," one yelled. Karen frowned, confused. "What's happening?" I stepped forward, arms crossed. "That's the hydraulic counterbalance activating. Remember the truck incident? You never asked how I fixed it." The bridge groaned, just enough to make them all stumble backward. Karen shrieked. "You're insane!" "No," I said evenly. "I'm cautious." She pointed a shaking finger. "You'll regret this. I'll have you arrested." "Already recording," I replied, nodding toward the small red light blinking on the post. Her face went pale. You can't," I cut her off. "You broke into private property in the middle of the night with contractors and no permit. The sheriff's office is about 15 minutes out. You might want to think about how you'll explain that." The men exchanged nervous looks. One whispered, "We're done, ma'am." She turned on them, shouting, "Don't you walk away from me." But they did. By the time the sirens echoed down the road, Karen was standing alone in the glare of my porch light, clipboard trembling, pride shattered. The deputies were professional, but you could tell they'd been waiting for this. Porter, the same deputy from before, stepped out of his cruiser. "Evening, Miss Hastings. Quite the time for construction, huh?" She stammered. I was inspecting for safety hazards." Porter looked around at the flashlights, the bolt cutters, the half-packed tool bags. "At midnight? She pointed at me wildly. "He booby-trapped the bridge. It's dangerous." Porter raised an eyebrow. "That bridge has been inspected twice. You're trespassing again." "I think that's dangerous enough." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "Ma'am," he said gently, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Now." She tried to argue, but the other deputy guided her toward her SUV. "You'll hear from my lawyers," she screamed before peeling out in a spray of gravel. I watched her taillights fade into the trees. Porter turned to me and grinned. "Guess your bridge keeps catching more than trucks these days." I chuckled. "It's sturdy like that." The next morning, the video from my security feed went viral. Karen's midnight meltdown, complete with her screaming about community rights, spread across town faster than wildfire. Comments flooded in. There goes the HOA queen again. Imagine trespassing twice and blaming the guy who owns the land. Give that bridge a medal. Even the local paper that had sided with her before published an update. Ho president under investigation for trespassing. False claims. That headline hit harder than anything I could have done myself. By noon, the Ridgepoint HOA board called an emergency meeting. Word was members were demanding her resignation. When the county hearing finally came around, she was there. But she looked smaller somehow. No clipboard this time, no sunglasses, just a tight smile and tired eyes. The room was full. Reporters, county officials, even a few neighbors from town who wanted to see how it all ended. Evelyn handled the case like a maestro. Your Honor, she said calmly, the evidence is clear. Ms. Hastings authorized unauthorized construction, trespassed twice, and caused damage to private property. My client acted only to protect what was his. Karen tried to interrupt, but the judge raised a hand. Ms. Hastings, you'll have your turn. When she finally did speak, her voice cracked. He's lying! He set traps, he tricked us, The judge cut her off. There is video evidence of your actions. Multiple witnesses confirm your presence on his property without consent. I suggest you stop talking before this turns into a criminal hearing. The color drained from her face. Evelyn didn't even need a closing argument. The decision was swift. Karen was fined for trespassing. The HOA was ordered to pay full restitution for the damage. Ridgepoint Estates lost all access rights to the creek. The courtroom broke into quiet whispers. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, finally breathing easy. Afterward, Miguel met me outside the courthouse, grinning ear to ear. So, how's it feel? Like peace, I said. The kind that lasts, he laughed. Think she'll show her face again? Not around here, I said. But if she does, she knows where the line is, and what happens if she crosses it. That evening, I drove home, the sun setting behind the ridge in streaks of orange and gold. The bridge glowed in the fading light, steel and concrete shining like quiet victory. As I crossed it, the boards hummed under the tires, steady, proud, unbroken. My father used to say a bridge connects two worlds. Maybe he was right. This one connected my past and my peace, and put a permanent end to the kind of people who thought they could buy either. 2 weeks after the hearing, Ridgepoint Estates looked quieter than ever. The once bustling construction site on the far ridge had gone silent. The half-finished expansion roads, the abandoned drainage trenches, even the HOA's polished signs, all left to weather under the summer sun. Karen Hastings had vanished from public view. No more press statements, no more board meetings, no more phone calls to county officials. Word around town was that she'd stepped down as HOA president for personal reasons. But everyone knew what that really meant. The board had pushed her out. Her replacement, a mild-mannered accountant named Tom Wilkes, came by one afternoon. He stood on the edge of my property, hat in hand, nervous as a rookie. Mr. Carpenter, he began softly, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what she did. Most of us didn't agree with it, but she didn't like hearing the word no. I nodded. I've noticed, he smiled awkwardly. We've canceled all Ridgepoint access permits for this area. We'll stay on our side of the creek from now on. Good, I said, shaking his hand. That's how it should have been from the start. He looked out at the bridge, gleaming in the sunlight. You built that yourself? Twice, I said, half laughing. He whistled. Well, sir, you've got my respect. And honestly, half the town's too. When he drove off, I stood there for a long time, staring at the bridge. What once felt like a line between war and peace now felt like something else entirely. A reminder that even when power stacks the odds, sometimes all it takes to level the ground is a man who refuses to bend. The next few weeks were peaceful. The mornings came slow and golden, mist drifting over the creek as the cattle grazed. I spent most of my time fixing up the barn, repainting the porch, and helping Miguel mend his fences. For the first time in a long while, the valley felt like home again. not a battleground. Every now and then, someone from town would stop by. "Hey, Mike, you're the guy with the bridge, right? Mind if I take a photo? My wife loves that story. Can't believe the HOA lady tried that. You should write a book." I'd just laugh and wave them off. I wasn't interested in fame, just peace. But I couldn't deny the satisfaction. The bridge had become something of a local landmark, not for its design, but for what it stood for. People said it was the line that stopped Ridgepoint's greed cold. Kids called it the cement trap. Even the sheriff had to joke about it. "You ought to charge a toll, Mike," Porter said one afternoon. "Call it the Karen fee," I grinned. "Nah, the satisfaction's payment enough." About a month later, I got an unexpected letter in the mail. Handwritten, no return address. At first, I thought it was another HOA stunt. But when I opened it, the handwriting was careful, almost humble. "Mr. Carpenter, I owe you an apology. You were right. I crossed a line, more than one. I let pride turn me into someone I don't even recognize. You didn't deserve that. I've sold my house at Ridgepoint and moved away. Maybe it's too late to say sorry, but I'm saying it anyway. Karen Hastings." I read it twice. Part of me wanted to crumple it up. The other part, the one my father raised, knew better. I set the letter down and looked out at the creek. The water glistened under the late afternoon sun, calm, steady, undisturbed. For the first time, I didn't feel anger anymore. Just relief. Sometimes you don't need to destroy your enemies. You just need to let them see themselves clearly, and in Karen's case, the reflection wasn't pretty. A few weeks later, the county sent me a commendation, an official-looking plaque with my name on it, for outstanding cooperation in upholding local safety ordinances and property rights. I had to laugh. A fancy way of saying, "Thanks for not letting the HOA bully you." Miguel came by that evening and saw the plaque hanging in the barn. "Look at you, hombre," he said with a grin. "All official now?" "Yeah," I said. "Took a few cement trucks to get there, but worth it." He leaned against the post. "So what now? You gonna retire your welding torch?" "Not yet," I said, thinking about building a gate next. "Just in case anyone else gets ideas," he chuckled. "Knowing you, it'll probably have lasers." I smirked. "Not lasers. Maybe motion sensors?" We both laughed, and for the first time in months, it wasn't the laughter of frustration when it was freedom. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the moonlight spill across the valley. The bridge glowed faintly under the silver light, the creek whispering beneath it. I thought about all the nights I'd sat there before, angry, tired, uncertain of what would come next. Now it was different. That bridge wasn't just a structure anymore. It was proof that you could fight back against power without losing your decency, that you could stand your ground without becoming what you hated, and maybe, just maybe, that you could build something unbreakable out of what others tried to destroy. Months later, Ridgepoint's reputation never quite recovered. People moved out, property values dropped, and the HOA quietly dissolved after an audit revealed financial mismanagement under Karen's leadership. When I heard that, I couldn't help but smile. It wasn't vengeance. It was balance. The world has a funny way of fixing itself when you stop letting bullies redraw the lines, and in this case, it all started with one small bridge and a man who refused to move it. The last time I drove across that bridge, I slowed down halfway, letting the tires hum against the steel. I looked out at the water below, calm, glinting in the sun, and thought of my father again. He used to say, "Son, people will test what you build. That's how you know it's strong." He was right. The bridge had been tested by time, by greed, by arrogance, and it had held. So had I. I smiled, tipped my hat to the wind, and drove on.